This last session is root cause analysis. It is going to be a adaptation of a case study that we do in our Lean Six Sigma Yellow Belt. So looking at our attendees, can I get a thumbs up in your Zoom reactions for anyone who's attended the BPMO training, either Yellow Belt or Green Belt? Okay, so we got a few and quite a few who have not.
Great.
So for those who have gone through it, this is an adaptation of the activity that we go through in the training. So for some, this might be a little bit of a revisiting, but an opportunity for you all to go through it. So it's probably different if you've done Yellow Belt somewhere else versus the one that we licensed through the Lean Six Sigma company. So you may have seen other case studies if you've done trainings elsewhere. All right, so kind of put context of what we're going to be doing as far as looking at root cause analysis. So rather than just looking at it in a piece unto itself, we're going to walk through a DMAIC approach to solving a problem. And the issue we're going to be addressing is that we have a coffee shop I've become an owner of, and it's not doing well. So we have to figure out why customers are unhappy with the coffee shop. So this may be kind of a way to look at some processes and scenarios that you're working on for stuff within your departments, but we're gonna have a little fun with this today. And I'm going to open up the chat as well, because there'll be a couple places where we will actually have kind of an opportunity for everyone to just kind of participate and share some feedback there as well. All right, so again, we're going to walk through DMAIC. So DMAIC is a process improvement structure. It is part of the Lean Six Sigma toolkit. And a little bit about when is the right time to use this and when it's not. So DMAIC is a process improvement methodology that you would go through to help you define and understand a problem and help understand the reason or the root cause for that problem and tailor the best solutions for it. So when you're sure of what the problems are, what the right solution might be, this is a great structured process to go through and help you actually implement a good solution that will hopefully address your true issues. Now, if the problem is already well known, if you already know what the solution is, if it's a quick win, if it's something that, like we say, the low-hanging fruit, you don't need to go through this process. Just make those changes. A lot of the things you've been hearing throughout this event is, empowering our staff to improve and get rid of waste and to really make improvements, minor improvements. So if we find small little things that we can fix, go do it. This is a process or a methodology, a structure that you can walk through to help you understand and make improvements to a process when we really don't know what exactly the problem is and what the best solution for it might be. All right, so we're going to walk through and each phase kind of look at some of the steps that you would do, and we'll follow some of those and a little bit of it interactive. I know we're not in the classroom, we can't put stickies up on the wall, but we'll have a little bit of fun and interaction with this as well. All right, so in the define phase, what's important to us is, and you've heard this many, many times, is understanding kind of our current state. So one piece of that is making sure we have the current state documented, whether that's in a detail or at least a high-level process map, so we know what is the flow of our process, how is it actually performing today. And we're going to find the scope around like what portions of the process we're trying to improve, or maybe what are some of the goals we're trying to accomplish for this particular improvement. And you're going to see our highlighted box here. One of the things we're focusing on for this walkthrough of a case study is getting voice of the customer. One of the conversations we had on Wednesday, even at our opening remarks, was thinking about the feedback loops that are in our processes and when does it make sense to actually interact with and kind of analyze that feedback. So some of you may have kind of active, where after a service goes out or a part of a link to an email and you're kind of continually receiving feedback on your processes, or you may have to actually, as part of a project, send out surveys solicit the feedback from the individuals that are receiving your process and getting feedback from your process performers. So in this case, our group here in Zoom, you are going to kind of take on the role of the customer. So for this coffee shop, if I was to survey you and you have some problems with it, what are some issues that you might have with the coffee shop? And don't worry about needing background, just play with it, have some fun. What are some complaints you would have about the coffee shop and why it's not your favorite place to go? So go ahead and put it into the chat. So we're hearing it's expensive. The coffee's gross. Ugh. I need to work with my supply chain to make sure there's a better product in here. There's just too many problems coming in. How do I know which one's the right one? So you can see, if you get bunch of feedback, you might be trying to figure out like where do we start? So part of what we're going to do here is then after you receive that feedback, how do you start trying to organize it in a way that helps inform you where do we need to start? So what we're going to do is take that feedback, and this is something you can do in a like facilitated session with, if you had the individuals in the room, or if you have to kind of do it afterwards. After you collect the voice of the customer, you can then start grouping it. Do you see some themes or similar complaints that you're hearing from the group that you're getting feedback from? And once you do that, after we start kind of organizing those, take another look at those. Because let's say we saw some things about, the coffee's bitter. We saw some things maybe about the coffee being too cold. When you think about it from the lens of a problem to solve, those might be two things we need to separate into their own category, because the solutions or the work I'd have to do to fix one of those things is be very different than the other. So then we start kind of not only grouping them and categorizing them, we're going to organize them by what do we hear the most often? And we're going to kind of arrange these. In this case, if you're working on it with the group, putting it kind of visually ascending the most common issue from left to right, we end up with this kind of a graph that we can see. And here is just done with stickies, and others you could graph it on a chart in Excel or some other tool. But when we get to this point, what does this give you? Feel free to either raise your hand and unmute or put a response in the chat. Once we have organized our feedback in this way, what do you have? All right, so I'm here seeing a few things about starting points, groupings. Toshi's saying the priority, Andrea's highest priority. Exactly. That's what we're trying to achieve with doing this. All of these may be problems we want to fix. They're all things that, if it is a problem, we want to improve. But if I have only a few resources and I'm working on a particular process and the sponsor tells me, this is your number one thing, way down here on the far right. With this information, I would actually be able to say, well, actually what we're hearing is this is where we have the most problems. So in our little scenario here of our coffee shop, the most frequent complaint we heard was the temperature of the coffee was bad. It was all over the place. We had things that were too hot and too cold. So when you take that data and you've arranged it in this way, you really have a prioritization of what is the issue that I could work on today that will have the biggest impact for my customers, for improving this process. And that's what we're aiming at getting here today. So after we do that, then we're going to actually kind of put together kind of go back to our scope of the project, the implementation we're going to do. We're going to take it to a bite size. Again, you've heard about scoping projects small, trying to make it very easy to accomplish. So we're going to focus a improvement project just around the temperature of the coffee. Now, it's not saying we're not going to address these other issues, but we'll come back to that after we've made some improvements here. So once we've done that, we're moving into the measure phase. So we've heard from the voice of the customers. Before we jump to saying, okay, that this is a problem and this is the one we need to fix, we look at the data for our process and does it kind of align with the issues we heard as well? So depending on your process, you may have a plethora of data. You might have ticketing data or some other system data that you can pull reports on that shows you volume and turnaround time, and maybe you have error rates or complaints. So it depends. So you may have a process where you don't have data. In like this example here at the coffee shop, we have no data. We have no real way of trying to understand how well our process is performing for getting that accurate coffee temperature that customers are wanting. So in this case, and for many of you, what you might have to do is sampling the data. So take a period of time of your process performers doing the work and collecting data as part of that. I've been on projects where we'd have, process performers with a check sheet and they would tally off, actual volume. And then maybe there's things we were recording, like, was the receipt complete? Was, whatever the case may be we're trying to measure, we'd have that in a data collection tool. So in this case, what we're going to do is sample some data. So for this coffee shop example, we're going to have 100 cups of coffee that are going out, being put together. We're going to take the temperature before we actually serve them. And so when we pull the data back, we'll be able to look and see how well is our process performing. Does that data align with the voice of the customer? So this is the voice of the process. And when we get the data back, yeah, we've got a problem. So looking at this distribution of our process performance, you can see what we have here, what we call the upper and lower spec limits. This is basically what the customer is saying our process should be performing in here. And in this example with the data, we've got about a third of our coffee that's going out too cold and 20% of it's going out too hot. So we're getting it right less than half the time. So our voice of the process told us, yes, there's a problem here. The voice of the customer, we're hearing complaints about this. So this is a problem we're going to focus on. And we have some good data to help us also, when we implement a change, to be able to go back to and see, okay, did we make improvements? Can we measure again and see how well our new process, our new solution, once we figure out what it is, actually get us to? Now, this is one of those points where our process performers, our sponsors, anyone, just human nature, we want to jump to solution. We know what the problem is. Let's fix it. But we want to wait. And this is why we're kind of focused on the root cause for today's kind of session. So it's kind of embedded with this larger picture of the structure. But really, we want to make sure that before we actually implement or design a solution, we're trying to understand, why is there a problem? So in this case, we're going to do some more analysis. We're going to try and identify the actual root cause issues of why our coffee temperatures are all over the place. We might have made some assumptions and said, well, our coffee machines must be the problem. We're going to go buy new barista machines and it's going to fix everything. And then we could spend lots of money, lots of time, be closed up for whatever it requires to implement that new tool, and we have the same problem. So before we spend a lot of our limited resources that our campus has, let's try and make sure we're solving the right problems and solving the actual root cause of them and not the symptoms of the problems that we are having. So there are a lot of different ways that you can go about doing this. So again, we saw some things with mapping the process. You could walk through with process performers and kind of call out where there's issues. And the SMEs that are involved in your process are going to be a great resource for trying to understand why things are happening. So there's a few different tools that we like using when we're facilitating a kind of root cause discussion with the SMEs, the process performers, and maybe you might have some outside people or customers involved in that group as well. We like to do this, what you see on the screen here, the Ishikawa or a fishbone diagram, or also 5 whys. The 5 whys, I like to tease the group there. I'm going to pretend to be the toddler, and a lot of you have kids, and you tell them something, they're going to keep asking why and why and why. So we would just document kind of those branches of everyone's logic chains of why something has happened until we feel like we've dug down deep enough to really understand what might be the root cause. The Ishikawa is a little more structured, but also sometimes it helps groups kind of think about some different elements. So it's structured around different categories. So thinking about the problem that's at the head of the fishbone, are there reasons why our coffee is not at the right temperature that's based on the processes, based on the equipment, based on the materials? So we might have an idea where someone thinks, okay, maybe it is the machines. So that might get put on here, and we try and figure out, continuing digging down, why would the machines be a problem? And we had come up with different reasons. So thinking about this as a group, if you were to be my team that's going to be facilitating, what are some reasons you think the coffee temperature is a problem? Again, go ahead and put some ideas in chat, and let's see what you all come up with. Obviously, you're not the SMEs or experts in our actual process people, but we'll just have some fun with this. So Andrea's thinking potentially it could be sitting there too long. Priya's questioning our ability to even measure how well we're performing. The machines, we also saw something about training. Max wants to blame global warming, so that hits on the environment. So definitely lots of different things that we can do. So once we have a bunch of different potential root causes on here, your group can vote on like whether it's dot voting or things that really trying to say, okay, what do we think are the most likely causes or the biggest causes that we can actually improve? And again, before we actually move on to those, we would do some things to potentially verify if that is really the root cause. Some of those techniques might be, so for instance, Priya mentioned the temperature. So we might go back and do sampling or look at how we did our sampling. What we were taking the temperatures the same way? Were we using the same thermometer? Or if we go back and take the data, does it seem to be the same? So helping us make sure, okay, yes, our data is good. All right, so we walk through that, no problems there. One of the other tactics that you'll use a lot is going to the Gemba or going to the place of work and observing. So if one of your root causes, is, saying something about it's being experienced in the environment or how work is being handed off from one team to another, you can actually go out to where that work is taking place and observe it and see. So in this case, one of the most common issues, our use case scenario was about the consistency of how the process is performed, or perhaps even the training of how our baristas were doing the work. We had data that got sampled, and actually all 3 of our baristas were part of that sampling data. So we went back and look and see, okay, does that tell us anything if we look at our different baristas with the same data we had? And this is what we get. So we've got the same upper and lower spec limits. We've got data from 3 different baristas. And what do you see when you look at this data now? Billy's everywhere. Billy is very, very inconsistent. What about Joe? What do you see when you look at Joe's data? Lisa calls out Joe's consistent. He is. But this is the lower spec limit. Joe is consistently bad. His defect rate is almost as bad as Billy. And what about Mary? Mary is like our golden child. This is the one that gets it right almost all the time. So looking at this data, we might just start being able to look and say, okay, now we have a understanding of what's happening and a potential solution. We need to standardize our training and the methods across our baristas. Might have Mary be the one in charge of, we we create this standard based on how she does the work and make sure that everyone who's trained, every new employee that comes on board is going to follow that same standard. So this is what we decided to do after we analyzed, and this is the root cause that we are going to create a solution for. Once we've selected a solution, then we're actually going to implement a solution. So remember, we had this knee-jerk reaction or kind of put the brakes on before we decided to jump to solution, because we want to make sure that when we do actually implement a change, we are putting the right change in place. We're making the right solution for the problem that we're addressing. So this is one of those things it's such a challenge, because even when you're doing your current state mapping, you're going to hear input from your process performers about, hey, this is something we need to do. And some of those inputs are going to be low-hanging fruit that, yes, they're obvious to everyone, but you want to be careful and keep an eye out for, are we really understanding why something has happened before we make that improvement? All right, so our solution in this case is going to be to create new standards that everyone's trained to and make sure that onboarding and training is consistent with new employees. Now, I want to call out this pilot solution because I know one of the questions that came up to kind of thinking about more of a long end-to-end process. If I make a change here and as unintended consequences down the road, that I might want to test or pilot a solution so that I know we check to see, okay, did we get the results we expected? Did we have any unintended consequences? And if so, if we didn't really get the change we wanted or cause additional problems that we didn't expect, we can roll it back. So keep that in mind when you're putting together your solutions. If it's a very self-contained process, you don't have to worry as much about kind of downstream effects. But if this is part of a larger end-to-end process, think about including your downstream customer as, one of the people thinking about this solution. Let them know, hey, this is a change we're thinking about making. Can you think of any reasons why this might cause issues for the end-to-end process? So this is where project management, change management also comes in. We're not kind of addressing that in this presentation, but this is where you start managing and implementing that change. This is where communication and training and resistance and coaching for your change, where it comes in as well. So I want to highlight those. Make sure if you weren't part of some of the earlier presentations, do look for those on our website later on when the videos are available. Definitely a lot of great information there. So as we mentioned, our solution, we're going to make sure everyone's trained, we're using the same processes, and we'll continue to monitor this change. We're going to be measuring it to make sure we are getting the results we expect, and also that the change stays, it gets sustained. So this will start us moving into what we call the control phase. We're verifying that, again, we've got the solution in place, we're getting the changes we expect, and we're continuing to maintain those solutions. One of the things you heard in our panel discussion earlier is also the very important parts of whether you're doing project management or this kind of process improvement. You have a change state that potentially the process owner isn't necessarily the one that's driving the project or the work to make the change. And in those cases, you have to make sure that as part of that work, you have a very clear transfer back to that process owner, so that the changes when the project team walks away, they are going to be sustained. That process will continue to perform well with the new state that you're trying to achieve. And that is walking all the way through our DMAIC process with a coffee shop. So this is an example, just very quick, of what we can do to kind of follow a problem-solving process improvement type of scenario just by having a very simple structure. I mean, DMAIC it's not rocket science. It is actually really just a rigorous approach to common sense. Understand your problem, define it from the start, get some data behind it, try and understand why something has happened before we improve it, make the improvements, and then make sure we sustain those improvements and we actually get the improvement we're looking for. And if you remember, we go back to that chart of these different problems. When I get to this point and I'm said, okay, we're good with this solution, doesn't mean we're done. We can go back and we can look at some of those other problems. We can look and see what was the second and third priorities. What else can we do to continually improve these processes? And while we were doing this, some of those low-hanging fruits could have been improved along the way as well. So this is how continuous improvement just continually goes. And our process could live a very healthy performance for a period of time, and then something changes. We heard from our panel as well, that whether it's policies or the environment, I don't know how many of you have been on campus for years, but I'm sure very quickly you're going to experience change. Our processes have to change as well in order to continue to meet the demands, the requirements that we need for services. So we can't just make it good once. We have to manage our processes. And that's what changing this mindset is all about. So once we get here, we've got the data, we're going to continue working on it, but don't forget to celebrate success, communicate what those changes were, really empower the staff, let everyone know, the work that was done by your process performers and, those who were involved in making the changes, and really continue to grow that capability in your departments. All right, any questions or thoughts? That was a very quick one. I think we have a fair amount of time left before the closing remarks. Any questions or thoughts?
I don't have anything in the Q&A or in the chat, but feel free to add anything either direct in the QA or directly in the chat if you have any questions or comments.
So I will say, Nick, Priya here, for those who have been in the sessions over the last 2 days and even earlier today, we were, as a team, we've been kind of harping on, when you map your current state, just delay, thinking about solving or problem solving as a group. And this is exactly the reason why. So what Nick showed you today with root cause analysis, once you map that current state and you have an understanding of all that you are doing as a group, then you can get into an activity like this, which is kind of fun, to be honest, when you're problem solving as a group, looking at all the issues at once and figuring out which one's the actual root cause and what can we feasibly solve for, what do we have resources for, what can we take on as a team. That way you're not trying to problem solve the 15 glaring things that you see in your current state when you're mapping it, but you're perhaps solving for the top priority things that you see as a group that are feasible for you. So I just wanted to point that out because I know we've kind of said that in previous sessions about delay on problem solving, but this is the exact moment in time when you would start doing that.
And we had a question in the chat about the timeline for root cause. So I hate to say it depends, but I guess it depends on the complexity. And once you've done kind of that facilitated session and you've landed on a root cause, sometimes it might take a little bit of work to verify it before you move on to actually not just the generating, but implementing a solution. The timeline doesn't really take that much as far as the work. A lot of times when we're facilitating this with teams, it's more of a question of their bandwidth to move, be able to have sessions and move on to the next piece. But there really doesn't have to be a huge amount of work here. So we haven't seen this really become a barrier to be able to continue moving forward. I don't know, anyone else on the team have any thoughts around kind of a timeline for root cause analysis
Yeah,
for that?
if you have data available, it becomes that much quicker and easier. So what we tend to find out is if someone's able to collect the baseline data or easily access the data for the group to kind of look at, you could get done with root cause analysis in as quick as an hour to 2 hours as a group. If you have to go collect that data, come back, analyze it, and then determine what those issues are, that might be a little longer. So that just depends on how long you need to kind of get your data collected so that you can then back up your findings. So, we've done it in projects where data is readily available. We get it done in an hour or two. We've had other projects where the data collection had to begin with the genesis of the project starting, and it took about a month. Or you had to kind of source out three different analysts around UC Berkeley's campus to kind of collectively put a data story together to then look at what your possible causes could be for root cause analysis. So again, I hate to say it depends, but if you have some of that data readily available, it becomes that much quicker and easier as a group to start to problem solve.
And when we're running a project like this, in the define and measure phase where we're getting that baseline data, if you've got that, generally moving through root cause is going to be fairly simple. And we do a lot of that outside of like a facilitated session. So we're doing a lot of background work to try and make sure that when we've got the SMEs in the room, we're not taking up a lot of their time, so we can move forward pretty quickly there. So unless the root cause was, something they landed on something that was really outside of the initial collection of data, then you shouldn't have to do too much work at that point to be able to verify that yes, this is a good thing for us to go build a solution for. All right. Any other questions or thoughts? Okay, I see your hand raised from Shauna.
I wanted to pick up on the points around like not jumping to solution mode. I love jumping to solution mode, because
yes, human nature.
We are problem solvers, and we are like, oh, I know. Anyway, so one thing that I have found helpful though is, or both ways. So if I am facilitating, a root cause or process improvement, and it's one that I know, I'm that much more tempted to jump in to solution mode. So I've found it so useful when there's someone that can facilitate, that work that doesn't really have a lot of skin in the game, right? Because they really are coming from this neutral perspective and can help the group continue to kind of pull back from getting sort of too far ahead. So if in your area, like find a buddy, right? Like a process improvement buddy, where you could be like, hey, buddy, can you come and facilitate this session with my group? And I'll come and facilitate the session with your group, because I don't know about finance stuff and you don't know about HR stuff. And we can kind of like swap. And so, we don't have to always try and be both the facilitator and be a part of the, SME group and be always toggling, sort of those hats back and forth. So I just would put a buddy will help you stay out of solution mode. If you can, find some friends, call BPMO.
Yeah, facilitating when you are involved in that change adds another layer. And Mike did a presentation around facilitating for process improvements. So I think, Mike, you raised your hand. I feel you're ready to kind of add to this one.
No, it's great. And thanks, Shauna. I in the chat, I just said yes, exclamation point. Yeah, I appreciate that, and it's great when we're all saying the same things, and that's the beauty of the common language and the mindset that we're trying to change here. Absolutely dead on, because especially if you're an expert and you have opinions and you want to be part of the conversation, you can't be facilitating at the same time. So great points. And also on the jumping to the solutions part, also remember that, and this also ties to the question about typical timeline for the analysis. Just remember that this is all part of being able to tell the story when this is all said and done of how you came to work on that solution, right? Getting all this information. This is all data and data points for you to make a decision on. Yes, we're going to spend time and resources on making this improvement. And if someone comes back and says, well, why did you choose that? Why did you choose to focus on that? Or why did you choose this solution? You can go back and justify, well, this is the work and research that we did and the data that we have that showed us this is the direction that we need to go. So all great stuff. Thank you.
Has anyone done work like this and have run into challenges trying to implement it? Stories you'd like to share as well?
I'll jump in again real quick, Nick. But it ties back to other things we've been talking about the last 3 days, which is, thinking of the process and not the people. Even more so, it's always important to not blame people, and it's the process, not the people. But even more so when you're in the root cause analysis, because you're looking for problems. It's not what the people are doing; it's about the process. And Katie has a question, and she said, "I find the hardest part is to maintain momentum to keep the process going, especially when workload gets really high."
And I think one of the issues there is a lot of process improvement projects that people have wanted to do or have come to us. Sometimes they are trying to boil the ocean. They're so big. They're trying to solve so many things. If you scope it down to just try and do bite size, get something done, see that improvement, let others see it, it helps you move on to the next problem that you want to solve. So I think that's a huge challenge that we have on campus. We try and we think like this is the one time I'm going to have to get everything right. So I have to make this huge project. And we have another comment about it's an issue with the change in leadership, things getting stalled. So yeah, especially if you have a project where it's taking you a long amount of time to get to that point where your change state is having been implemented and sustained. If you have a change in leadership in that period and a change of vision, change of resources, anything else happens from outside of the project that really pulls people away, it's hard to keep that momentum going. It's hard to keep people involved in it. So that's another reason just to try and get a really succinct, dialed in scope of what we're trying to accomplish and really just stick to that. And Kavina mentioned that talk about other ways that we can solicit voice of the customer. So definitely there are ways that you see this a lot, whether it's you as a customer, also you get survey forms coming back to you all the time. So there's a lot of different ways that we can get feedback in a process that someone's receiving. You can survey the customers of that process. You can survey the process performers about what kind of things they're receiving challenges on. You're going to get you might get a lot of feedback if you process where you're getting a lot of good interaction from people, and that's where you want to make sure you're monitoring it as well. So especially if you have this ongoing feedback, and you want to make sure you're watching for themes. If you start getting a heightened response rate and you're seeing the same thing over again, that's kind of the thing that clues you in, hey, we've got a problem here we need to start looking at. So there's ways of having kind of ongoing feedback coming in, and there's ways that you're scoping for a process improvement project, and you go out and solicit feedback specifically for that. Beyond survey forms, you can do kind of a stakeholder meeting and facilitate a discussion in front of your people that you're trying to get input from, which not only is a great resource, but when you do that, it also starts building that buy-in and that kind of change management. So they feel they have kind of agency around the direction we're going as well too. So lots of great ways to think about, how do you get good feedback for your processes. All right, if there's nothing else, I think we'll close this session.